everybody, Young Grasshopper here. Welcome to the Cliffside Bunker in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. And this is a video in which I explain rule by rule the differences between ACCESSORY's 1940 Global 2nd Edition and Grasshopper's 3G40 Tournament Edition, or what some people like to call YG40. So it's been getting a lot of play online, and again, big thanks to my good friend Contango for coding that in AAA. So I'll put a link in the description box of this video where you can use that software. So I've been getting a lot of questions about the rules, therefore I just wanted to make a nice clean compact video talking only about the rules. We'll get into strategy and other episodes and whatnot, but in this variant that I designed, if you can call it a variant, I mean, I really wanted to just stay true to ACCESSORY's 1940 Global 2nd Edition. That's why, for better or for worse, so many of the political situations and mechanics and whatnot really haven't changed. Now, that being said, the changes that were made really affect the game, but it's all for one purpose, and the purpose was to be able to get that 1940 Global feeling in a competitive tournament structure where we have faster game rounds and we have a definitive winner. It's not unlike what Larry wanted to do with Gen Con by creating 1942, which is still played at that event and really enjoyed by a lot of people. Tournament Edition is not really meant to be compared to the larger G40 type variants like Cireblood's BBR, or of course HBG Global War 36, which stands on its own. And even some YouTube wars out there like No Limit has a lot of good house rules and whatnot. Really just restrained myself and just kept the things that were going to be profitable for the purpose, which was competitive tournament structure gameplay. So let's get into it, and I'll start with the first rule change. It has to do with the United Kingdom. So here in front of me, I've got a typical ACCESSORY's 1940 Global 2nd Edition setup. All the pieces where they belong. And in the corner here, the out-of-box values for the national economies on the income tracker, all set up and ready. And I've also put on display, using these roundels, the out-of-box G40 order of play. So these cards right here are from a card deck I call OMAHA Beach. It's a gaming accessory that I created specifically for playing 3G40 Tournament Edition. We're going to see them a lot. And I'll put a link in the description box of this video where you can find them. So the first change or difference that I want to explain has to do with these tan UK pieces right here. This is, of course, UK Pacific, and it's represented by the Union Jack. And over here, the gray pieces are Anzac or Australia. Now, before we begin playing 3G40, we need to change the setup. We're going to combine Anzac with UK Pacific. So, not unlike the way Canada is included with the London economy, Anzac is now going to be included in the Calcutta economy. So essentially we're going to eliminate Anzac from the game. So to change the setup to do this, we're going to swap out all these tan UK pieces for Anzac gray. All right. So Calcutta is the new capital of this nation, this combined UK Pacific, and Sydney over here is just another victory city, the same way Ottawa is another victory city. So before I swap all this out and come back, I want to just point out the multinational force here in Malaya and the multinational force here in Cairo. We're going to talk about that, and also we're going to talk about this major industrial complex in Calcutta. All right, so I'll be back. I'll swap out all these pieces. I'll show you what it looks like. So here's what it looks like now with all those tan pieces swapped out for the gray. And of course, we did not need to change anything over here. Now those pieces plus these pieces now create the new nation UK Pacific. And you'll notice here in Malaya with that multinational force, We just swapped out the UK tan piece for a gray chip, so now 4 total. They're all the same. However, over here in Cairo, we kept the 2 UK Pacific pieces as they are, no change there. And finally, for the setup, the last change, we're going to take this major industrial complex and exchange it for a minor industrial complex. Now that's it for setup changes, and I just want to show you the cards now. You'll see the setup cards here in this Omaha deck is titled at the top 3G40. So if you own the Utah deck, which is an out-of-box gaming accessory, you won't confuse or mix up the setup cards. Utah deck has a title 1940. These are all labeled 3G40. So I'll show you the setup card for the new nation here. And of course, all the pieces in and around Australia plus in and around India are all together now. And the Union Jack representing this new combined nation. And you'll see here in India that the major industrial complex in the setup is changed to a minor. Of course, that's got the 3G40 title up there as well. And the last thing I want to talk about these cards when it comes to the C zones, you'll notice that they don't really collaborate with your out-of-box board. So this is to communicate with a map file that I created, and the map file, I'll put a link in the description box of this video, and I have renumbered all the C zones in that file. You don't have to print it or anything, but just to let you know that this is not an error when it comes to these C zones, okay? So the next thing that I'm going to talk to you guys about is the order of play. But before we do, let's take Anzac off the board there. We'll adjust this in the next clip. And let's take Anzac off the board here. Okay, be right back. So you can see here that I have rearranged the roundels in our display to show the new order of play. So this is the 3G40 order of play. It's quite different than out of box. You see here our new UK Pacific nation goes second. And you can see Russia and America are all the way down here at the bottom of the order of play. And there's a reason for this, and I'll show you this card here. You'll see this card in the Omaha deck. And it basically shows the order of play, but it's divided by these lines. And I call these segments or columns turn blocks. So turn block 1, turn block 2, 3, 4, etc. So I'm going to put a link in the description box of this video guiding you to a forum thread over at accentallies.org. And it shows all the rules in writing that I'm explaining to you. And I want to point you to the player assignments section. So in G40 out of box, player assignments were more of a suggestion, whereas in 3G40, it's mandatory. So if you have a 4-player game, a 5-player game, a 6-player game, you're going to divide the nations amongst the players according to the chart in the forum thread. And that plus this, plus the order of play, is going to allow us to really speed through our game round. So in turn block 1, Germany and UK Pacific are going to go. And Japan in turn block 2 cannot begin their turn until both nations are done. Same thing here. Italy cannot begin until both nations are done in each turn block. But Germany and UK Pacific can be going at the same time. Now, whenever there's interaction with the units, like for example here, UK Pacific with Germany, you're going to refer to the turn block, and Germany being at the top of this turn block is always going to get the initiative there. Okay, so once these two nations are finished their turn, go into the second turn block, and Europe can be purchasing their units and planning their strategy the same time Japan is doing the same. All right, so with the assigned players plus the turn blocks plus the order of play, we're going to have lightning fast rounds. So I need to start explaining now some political situations for our new UK Pacific nation. And we have over here some national objectives that are new or modified. I'll explain those. We also have some tweaks regarding the UK-Europe national objectives. We're going to go over that. Now, that being said, all the changes I tried to limit only to UK-Europe and UK-Pacific. Therefore, political situations for America, France, Italy, Germany, Russia, China, and Japan, they're all the same. So you don't need to relearn anything in regards to those nations. So the major changes are for UK, Europe, and UK Pacific. Let's take a look at our income tracker here. And remember, in out of box, UK Pacific begins with a starting income of 17 IPCs. But because we combined ANZAC and removed it from the game, that now gets bumped up to 27 IPCs. That is their starting income, 27 IPCs. So we're going to get into talking about some rules for the Dutch islands, some declaration of war rules, and also a new rule, American Lend-Lease. Be right back. So the first political situation that I want to explain in regards to our new UK Pacific nation is when they can declare war against Japan. So just like in out of box, they are already at war with Italy and Germany, and just like out of box, they're not at war with Japan. Now, unlike out of box, where they can declare war against Japan at the beginning of any round, here in 3G40 there's a restriction. So the UK Pacific may not declare war against Japan till the beginning of their third turn. Okay, that's the restriction. So they cannot move into China, that's an active war. They may not attack any Japanese units until the beginning of their turn 3. Now, obviously, Japan could declare war verbally against them earlier. Japan could attack, make unprovoked attacks against units earlier than turn 3, and that would also bring the United States into the war. Now, if left out of the war and it becomes the beginning of turn 3 and UK Pacific declares war, that would not bring America into the war. So you don't have to declare war turn 3, and there is a reason for that when it comes to America. But when UK Pacific does become at war, immediately this minor industrial complex will become a major industrial complex at no charge. So just like the minor industrial complexes are upgraded to majors for the Americans when they declare war against the Axis powers, when the UK Pacific declares war or becomes at war with Japan, that India factory is immediately upgraded to a major. So we also have these new national objectives, and we're going to talk about them in the next clip, but got to make sure we understand that UK Pacific may not collect their national objective income when not at war with Japan. However, just like when they swap out the minor industrial complex for the major when becoming at war, now they can collect these national objectives during their collect income phase. So there's a few interesting things that I want to explain here. With this new UK Pacific nation, you can see that they go second in the order of play, turn block 1. So they can move these units, these starting pieces, and they're not vulnerable anymore to a typical J1 attack that we might see in out of box. Also, too, no longer can a sneaky Carl be done. If you're not familiar with that gambit, I'm not going to get into it right now, but if you're aware of the sneaky Carl strategy, it can't be done in this variant because it requires 2 separate nations. We've combined them into 1. Also, too, we get rid of that split economy rule that a lot of players have trouble with. So UK could move through here. They could take this. They could take this. They could do an amphibious assault on Iraq and take that. And all this economy on this side of the board, anything taken by gray pieces would go to the Calcutta economy. So we don't have all that confusing split economy differences that we see in out of box. Now, when it comes to these Dutch islands, there's a rule in out of box book where it allows UK Pacific and even ANZAC for that matter to land on these Dutch islands and take the money even when not at war. So they could jump here and immediately increase their economy by landing on there and even landing some planes the same turn in which they jump on it. But in 3G40, we're not going to allow that because it's too lucrative to give UK Pacific this money, considering that they start with 27 IPCs. They can take territories in the Middle East and Africa to increase their economy in Calcutta. So just like the relationship with these islands in America, that's how we're going to treat it now for UK Pacific. So for example, if when at war, Japan comes in here and jumps on this empty island, they're of course going to take that economy and adjust the income tracker. Maybe next they come in here and destroy this unit and take this as well. Now that's going to leave these two Dutch islands vulnerable to liberation. They could come up here and they could jump on this, and now they would take the income for this. Now they would adjust the income tracker for UK Pacific, but not before liberation. So just like the way the Americans jump on Morocco when it's still French controlled, they don't get the money for that. But if they jump on Morocco when it's Axis controlled, they're going to take over that territory. So just look in the rule book when it comes to these islands, the way that it is for America is now for UK Pacific. I want to show you now these new national objectives for our UK Pacific nation. And essentially when at war, we're going to collect 5 IPCs if we control Shanghai, 5 IPCs if we control Malaya, 5 for Hong Kong, and outer perimeter here, which I'll explain. So even though in the last clip I told you that landing on a Dutch island will not give you the economy, it's still profitable even when not at war to get a land unit on one of the Dutch islands. And for that reason, when we do become at war and we still have that land unit on a Dutch island, we're going to collect for outer perimeter. It states the UK Pacific has at least 1 land unit on Sumatra, Java, Celebes, and or Dutch New Guinea. So essentially, if we're left out of the war and it becomes the beginning of our turn 3 and we declare war on Japan, and we've done this either here, 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 or here, then we're going to collect up to 15 IPCs. We're going to still have Malaya, we're going to still have Hong Kong, and now we've met the conditions of this outer perimeter. So that's a lot of money, and that's something that Japan has to deal with as far as consequences for leaving them out of the war that long. Now, I explained earlier that we've also done some tweaks for UK Europe, and a lot of it has to do with these new or modified national objectives we see here. So no longer does UK Europe only get 1 national objective worth 5 IPCs, we have here 4. Now let's look at the top 2. These are a play on that single national objective offered in out of box. We have British colonies and British Commonwealth. So on the left, British colonies states UK Europe controls all their original territories within the continent of Africa. And here on the right, British Commonwealth, UK Europe controls all their original territories outside the continent of Africa. So UK Europe could collect up to 10 IPCs for all their original territories as opposed to the 5 offered in out of box. Let's continue here. European theater. There is at least 1 UK Europe land unit on an originally controlled French territory in Europe. So an originally controlled French territory in Europe would be either Normandy, France, or southern France. Now we do have some units there in the setup, and because of our position here on the order of play, if for whatever reason Germany fails to take Paris, and there is in fact one of those UK land units, the tank or the artillery left behind, they would collect 5 IPCs for meeting that condition. So finally here, Mediterranean theater, there are no Axis warships in the Mediterranean Sea. No Axis warships in the Med. All right, so if that condition is met, they're also going to collect 5 IPCs for that as well. So next I want to explain something that we call American Lend-Lease. Be right back. So American Lend-Lease is a rule in 3G40, and it has to do with UK, Europe, and their place new units phase. So I've set up the board here to show what it might look like in the Atlantic come UK, Europe's turn 1. Now the rule states that for every place new units phase of UK, Europe, in which America is still a neutral power, meaning not at war, then UK, Europe will place in 106 a free destroyer and a free fighter in Quebec. So for every place new units phase for UK, Europe, in which America is a neutral power, they're going to get those 2 free units. We also have something called a capital purge rule. So we all know that when a capital is captured, the conquering nation will take the cash on hand for themselves and spend it in their next round. For example, turn 1, Germany comes in, takes France, and takes the 19 IPCs in their pocket. And maybe later on, Germany builds up and they take London now, and the rule states that they're going to collect all the cash on hand UK, Europe is holding. And that's all fine, but in capital purge, if the same nation takes the same capital, they cannot take that money again. If the same capital is taken a second time, all the cash on hand will go to the bank. So this is something that I encourage everybody to accept in any G40 game, even if it's the only house rule you ever play. There's all kinds of problems with liberating capitals, knowing that you're just going to be giving the enemy that much more money if you can't hold it. So in 3G40, we have this capital purge rule. The conquering nation will take the cash on hand the first time, but the same nation conquering the same capital, money goes to the bank. So I said at the top of the video that I designed 3G40 for competitive structured tournament games. And for that, we need a definitive end. We need everybody to know when the games are going to finish. Now, for tournament play, my recommendation is 8 complete game rounds. All right, even with faster gameplay, 8 rounds is something that everybody can do. However, a lot of people have mentioned that it's very difficult for the Allies to win in a short 8-round game, but that's another video for another time. Now, if you're playing with your friends in a house game, you can all decide at the beginning if you want to play a short game, 8 rounds, or a medium game, 10 rounds, or a long game, 12 rounds. But it's really important that everybody decide unanimously at the beginning of the game so that during the game, everybody knows which round the game is going to end. And it'll become very important when we talk next about victory conditions. So here I have laid out on the bank of my table a bunch of cards, and they are essentially victory objectives, I call them, or victory tokens. And we're going to go through them. They're kind of like national objectives. They have a condition that requires you to gain it in order to get that point. But first, let's just go over the fundamental victory conditions of 3G40. And this says, once a victory objective has been achieved, a victory token will be awarded. The side with the most victory tokens at the end of 8 game rounds will win the war. A victory token is awarded immediately upon completion of an objective, regardless of when or how it was achieved. Also, victory tokens may never be awarded twice for the same objective, nor may a victory token ever be lost after it has been gained. So with all that in mind, I'm just going to go ahead and start talking about these. So the blue cards here in front of us are for the Allies, and the red cards are for the Axis. Now there are 10 cards each, and I want to be very clear and let you guys understand that each of these objectives are worth 1 point. Now, some are much easier than others. Some are extremely difficult, almost to the point of impossible. But nevertheless, each one card gained by meeting the condition is 1 point. So as the game goes, we want to take the victory tokens that are achieved and make them visible to the whole table. You're going to put them somewhere on the board. So let's say, for example, the Axis gained a victory objective first, and they're going to put it somewhere on the board so everybody can see the score. Okay, maybe perhaps later on the Allies get a victory token as well, and then the Axis score another, and late in the game the Allies score that one, and it is now the end of 8 game rounds. Now this variant does not allow for ties. That's where this card comes in. It's the attrition card. It's for the Allies. Basically states that the score is tied at the end of 8 complete game rounds. So even though we are at the end of the game, 8 complete game rounds, the score is not 2-2. The final score is actually 3-2 for the Allies when we apply that attrition card, because that condition has been met. Now, it doesn't matter, as the rule said, when or how you gain any of these. Once the condition is true, it gets put on the board and tallied as 1 point each. So a lot of these are straightforward, don't need much explanation, but I am going to go through the ones that people have been asking about. So let's take a look at supremacy here for the Axis. So the Axis control Washington and or San Francisco. So you're not going to get 2 points for controlling both Washington and San Francisco. If you control one of them, you're going to get that token. But if you control both of them, it's still only 1 point. It's the same for the supremacy objective here for the Allies. Take a look. The Allies control Berlin and or Tokyo. So there's no point in going after both capitals. But if you can get one of them in a game, you are going to get that victory objective. So here, London, Sydney, Moscow. And the one thing that I want to reiterate when I read the rule was that if you gain it just once, you're going to get that point, and it's going to be with you the whole game. Even if the Allies liberate one of these that you've achieved, you're still going to count that at the end scoring. So China, the Axis control all 18 originally controlled Chinese territories, and that includes the ones on the coast. So any China territory that has a roundel on it is an originally controlled territory. And take a look, it's the same condition for the Allies. Europe, the Axis controls 7 or more cities on the Europe side of the board. And when we talk about Europe, we talk about the split here, this border coming straight up, and anything on this side. All right, so if you control 7, including your capital, any 7 victory cities total, you're going to get that. The Pacific, the Axis control all 8 originally controlled American islands in the Pacific. So any island in the Pacific that begins with an American roundel, and that includes the Philippines, there's 8 of them. Okay, if you have landed on all those islands, you're going to get that victory objective. Now, the Pacific token for the Allies states that if you control all 8 originally controlled Japan islands, so there's also 8 Japan islands. Tokyo is not part of it. Okay, Formosa, Marianas, so on, so on. So if you've made a landing, and again, it doesn't have to be with one nation,
You know, you could have UK Pacific land on a couple and America land on a couple. Africa. So the Axis control Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Tobruk, Alexandria, and Egypt. So all these territories right here, along here from Morocco all the way to Egypt. Now it's different than the national objective for Italy by controlling Alexandria into Morocco. For the objective, you need Cairo as well as all them. And you'll get that point. Asia, the Axis control Calcutta, Malaya, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. So Shanghai, Hong Kong, Malaya, and India, Calcutta. That is the Asia token. And finally, for the Axis economy here, the Axis have a combined total of 144 IPCs on the income tracker. Now, this has been asked a lot, and it says right there on the income tracker. So it does not include any national objective money. So if you take Italy, Japan, Germany, and what their amounts are showing on the income tracker combined, if it's 144, that is the economy token. So here for the allies, Rome, straightforward. We talked about China. The Europe token is that the allies have liberated Paris. So any time in which the allies have taken Paris back from an Axis nation, then they're going to get that. We talked about the Pacific. Instead of 8 allied islands, we're talking about 8 Japan islands. Sorry, 8 American islands and 8 Japan islands. Africa, the allies control all non-neutral territories on the continent of Africa. So this does not include French Madagascar down there. So if the allies control all territories on the continent of Africa, not including Madagascar, then they have achieved that. Asia is the same as the Axis. Calcutta, Malaya, Hong Kong, and Shanghai. Occupation. The Allies control Warsaw and all 3 original pro-Axis neutral territories on the board. So here's Warsaw right there. And then the pro-Axis territories, 1, 2, and 3. So if they control those 3 plus Warsaw, that's a point. And diplomacy, the Allies control all 8 pro-Allied neutral territories. So the pro-Allied neutral territories here, Brazil, there's one here. Don't forget about Crete, right? Greece, Northwest Persia. So all the pro-Allied territories, there's 8 of them total. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Attrition, we talked about that. It is the tiebreaker. And finally, guys, I want to show you how to use stage cards. So I've laid them all out here on the bank. Each nation has 2 of them, and you'll find them in the OMAHA deck with everything else. I'm really proud of these. I spent a long time working on them, and it's really nice to implement them into 3G40. And I think that they're important. It solves some of the problems that we've had in our group. And any event that I have is going to be mandatory that players use these, and you'll see why after I explain. But in house games, it's up to you guys if you want to use them or not. But let's take a look. So Germany has 2 cards, UK Pacific, Japan, UK Europe, and so on and so on. And I've put these in the order of play for 3G40. So we have here Germany, and this is a mobilization card. So everybody's card on this face on the left-hand side is a mobilization card. And basically what you're going to do to begin your turn is you're going to put whatever you purchased on top. And it lets you know how many IPCs that you start with. And what's important is you can see here that the new UK Pacific starts with 27 IPCs. So that's a good reminder always of what your original territories add up to. Take a look here. We got stage 1. It's a green border, stage 2, red border. So on everybody's card, stage 1 green border, stage 2 red border. So let's say Germany is about to enter their turn. They have placed their mobilization card. Okay. Now it says here to put it in the turn box and start the timer. Now that's only if timers are being used. And basically on my custom map, there are 2 ghost boxes, one on the left hand board and one on the right hand board. So it says here to put this card in that spot. It basically shows that we are in turn block 1. And when you remove it, and when both turn block 1 cards are removed, then turn block 2 can go. So there's a detailed description of what can be done in stage 1. And what we do is, once you're in stage 1, you can do any of these. So we allow it, and I would allow it in tournament play, that you can go ahead with your combat movements, okay, even though it's at step 5 here, and go back and purchase your new units later. So anything done in stage 1 can be done while you're in stage 1. However, this is the important reason why we use stage cards. As soon as you flip this, you are telling the table that you are done all your combat movements, you're done all your purchases. Now that's important because it will solve arguments, because what the opponent wants to do is to strategize. They want to decide if they're going to scramble. They want to decide if they're going to use kamikaze tokens. They can't do that if the person is going to be vague and say, oh, I wasn't done. You know, a lot of people might verbally say, okay, I'm finished. And that's fine amongst friends. But even the rule of as soon as dice are rolled, then your turn is over doesn't really work, because you want to be able to strategize the option of if you're going to scramble air units or if you're going to deploy kamikaze tokens. So as soon as you turn this card over, you cannot change anything about your combat movements, cannot change anything about your purchases. Now, stage 2 is a little bit more rigid. You can't just flip and flop, right? Because obviously you got to resolve combat before you do non-combat, and you're going to place your units at the end, right? Now, where it says place new units, your mobilization is going to go on the board, and now this turns over to stage 3. Stage 3, we have things like collect income, resolve convoy raids, and then of course check for victory tokens if you missed any. So nice reminders of the turn sequence so you don't forget anything, but also too very crucial when it comes to flipping this card, because it really solves a lot of arguments in our group. Maybe it might solve the same thing for you guys. So take a look here. We've got stage 3 on the back. So as soon as the units go on, stage 1, then you flip it, declaring that you're done with your combat. And you're going to resolve combat and whatnot. And then, of course, when you place your new units on the board, this card becomes free. You're going to flip it over and do stage 3. All right. So I'll show you the artwork before I sign off here. So we got the Bismarck there. Try and get as many close-ups as I can. I really am proud of these cards, the way that I designed them, using the artwork I found on the internet. Now, China is interesting because there's not a lot of options, and I reflected that in China. So you're not going to have like purchase new units and things like that. When you flip this, you know, there's not much on stage 3, there's not much on stage 2, because they just don't have the same options as most nations do. I really like that picture for the Soviet Union. You can see that the font is associated the best I could with the nations. So really beautiful cards, and I feel like they're important in our group anyway. And if you're a group that has those arguments about people reneging, if they said that they're finished their combat, but then they found a mistake and wanted to take it back, you could implement something like this to keep them honest. And this is also a great tool for tournament play when you don't know people and maybe they're not going to be so easy to forgive. All right, be right back.
So that's it, guys. That's 3G40 Tournament Edition, just the rules. So it was really hard for me not to express my excitement about certain rules when I'm doing a video like this, but I'm really glad that I got it done. And now I can get into videos talking about American Lend-Lease and how that affects the game and certain victory objectives and how to go after them and things like that. But this was absolutely essential in creating so that people can just watch one video and get all of it, just the rules. And I want to thank everybody that's been playing online and giving me feedback, and special thanks to all my friends and play testers that helped create this, as well as Contango. Again, thanks for putting it on AAA. And until next time, may all your rolls be ones. Cheers, guys, and happy gaming.